Hello. Good morning. Please take your seats. So, hi everybody, and I'm Anders Brännström, chair of the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations. And I have the pleasure to wish you all welcome to this workshop, and that we may have initiated, but we are working in close collaboration with our partners. Of course, the Ford Foundation, Columbia Center for Sustainable Development, the Rockefeller Foundation, the American Assembly at Columbia, Transit Center, RPA, Regional Planning Associates, ITDP, and others. And of course, it's only as a collaborative effort this has been able to take place. A few short words on the background. VREF, we have every second year approximately workshops. And we've had, the last one we had in London, before that we were in Beijing, the time before that we were in Nairobi. The idea is, of course, to bring together people that we are supporting with research into future urban transport issues, and to create a platform for exchange of ideas with younger researchers. Yesterday there was a PhD seminar day, and as today with a broader audience, with high national presence, with Secretary Foxx and Commissioner from New York, and of course, and then we'll continue a few days more with interesting subjects. So, but as all workshops, contribution is down to each of us, not just to the people talking at the panels or doing the pre-planned speeches. So, most welcome, and Elliott, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Xavier, please.
Anders, thank you. A big thank you to you and your team. A warm welcome to everybody on behalf of the Ford Foundation. We are excited about this day for so many reasons. We have an opportunity to look at the issues, look at the challenges, look at the stakes facing Greater New York and the US through the lens of the global, and vice versa. This is a terrific cross-section of folks from civil society, academia, policymaking, and more. Transportation is something to which we have a long connection here at the Ford Foundation, and I'll take just a moment on it. You didn't come to listen to me, but I did want to underline why we see this as so vital to creating a world that's more prosperous and more just. Transportation and transportation-related investments and practices are closely linked, crucially linked, as you all know, to carbon emissions and the climate and resilience questions, connected to placemaking in the broad sense, which affects so many dimensions of human life, and deeply connected, we know, we've all learned, to economic opportunity, to questions of economic justice and poverty reduction and economic inclusion. So for so many reasons, this to us is it's a vital and a timely conversation. The range of the room is perfect given the conversation ahead for us. And so I think are the approaches of the different partners. Anders named all of the partners. Let me add our thanks to everyone who's been engaged in conceptualizing this and putting it together. And just add that for Ford, given our efforts to support research on one hand, policy education and advocacy, sometimes policy design, social movement building, human rights advocacy, I mean, a tremendous range of things here and around the world. To be able to work with partners that complement us so nicely is a real delight and a pleasure. So with that, again, a warm welcome to the Ford Foundation. Let's have a fantastic day, and let me turn it over to Elliott.
Let me add my welcome to all of you. This meeting, this workshop, came about when VREF asked if we would put together a New York-based project, and what we saw was that this was an amazing opportunity to start to bring together a lot of players who are concerned about the same set of issues. They work in parallel. They work in sometimes they overlap, and the notion was to begin a dialogue that would continue to leverage all these very important people and all of these resources. The theme here is really about how do we begin to turn knowledge into action, it's been a long time in coming, but today we have our partners, our VREF, Ford Foundation, the Transit Center, the American Assembly, the RPA, Rockefeller, ITDP. These are all groups that we've all worked together around each other, and now we're going to be starting to talk about how to begin to focus these issues and how to begin to change, use a lot of the things we know, how to begin to use them to make something happen. I just like to take a personal moment to thank the people that work with me. Jacqueline Klopp, who took an amazing leadership role on this, Danielle Petretta, and Liz Marcello in particular for essentially making all this happen. And Liz wanted to remind me about the fact that we have this hashtag, it's hashtag Transform Access, if you want to keep up and know what's really going on around here today. Beyond that, what I'm looking forward to is a very exciting and stimulating 2.5 days. So welcome, and thank you all for coming.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Chen with the Ford Foundation, and it is our delight and honor to introduce New York City Transportation Commissioner Polly Trottenberg. Polly is a veteran of transportation decision-making at the highest levels in the United States and has brought her expertise to New York City to our great benefit. She oversees one of the largest portfolios in municipal government anywhere. And if you look at the bio that was handed out in the beginning, you'll find some rather amazing statistics. 6,000 miles of the world's busiest streets and highways, and my favorite one is 1 million street signs. That's a big responsibility when you have teenagers who are frequently stealing them off of posts here and there. So, Polly has worked in the transportation field for quite a long time, a couple of decades. I believe we met when you were working for Senator Schumer, and most recently, before coming to New York City, she was Undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Transportation and served in various posts within DOT and other agencies. So please welcome Polly Trottenberg.
Thank you, Don. It is really fun to be back at the Ford Foundation. When I was growing up, my father actually worked here, and it was in the 70s, and as you may remember, at that time, Lucite furniture was very popular. So I love this podium. It's taking me back. It is a great honor to be here on behalf of Mayor de Blasio to introduce Secretary Anthony Foxx and welcome him to New York City. I have to say, from the point of view of the de Blasio administration, he has a big fan club here in New York. He has been a great champion for cities and for New York in particular. He's really, I think, provided us with leadership and a very clear vision on a safe and a strong and a resilient urban transportation system. And in the case of New York, he's really helped provide some of the resources we need to realize that vision. Some of you may know he was here last month with John Podesta, the advisor to President Obama, and they were announcing at that time $3.6 billion with a B in resiliency fund to go to transit agencies throughout this region to help rebuild and recover after Hurricane Sandy. And those funds those very desperately needed funds went to the MTA, New Jersey Transit, to our own Staten Island Ferry, and we couldn't be more grateful. I have to say, for the 8.4 million people who live in the city and the almost 20 million people who live in this region, we owe him a big, big debt of gratitude. We couldn't be more thankful. And as Don mentioned, I had the privilege of working with Secretary Foxx at USDOT, and I really got to see firsthand the passion and the drive and the intellectual curiosity he brings to the job, and particularly something that's near and dear to the hearts of us who care about urban America, a real focus on cities and their transportation needs. As all of you know, he was formerly mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and really made his mark there in the transportation sphere. He had the leadership to extend their light rail system, to get the Charlotte streetcar project going, to do a lot of innovative finance things with highway projects. And he also is someone who is a real steadfast champion of transportation safety. And now we see that he's brought that leadership on transportation safety to US DOT as well. He's launched something that we're very excited about, the DOT Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Initiative, aimed at reducing traffic-related deaths and injuries. His effort, which involves all the modes at US DOT highways and transit and highway safety, will look at design improvements, behavioral changes, and help provide resources to localities like New York and others around the country to work with pedestrians and advocacy groups and make streets safer. And here in New York, I'm particularly proud because we're actually really engaged in a parallel effort. Mayor de Blasio is one of his signature initiatives, Vision Zero, which has the very ambitious goal of eliminating all traffic fatalities and injuries on the roadways of New York. And in New York, we're pursuing Vision Zero with all the tools at our disposal, engineering calmer, more pedestrian-friendly streets, doing better education and enforcement, and really helping to increase public awareness. And I was so happy yesterday I got to stand with the mayor and advocates and a number of elected officials as the mayor signed a city council bill lowering New York City's default speed limit from 30 down to 25. 50 years ago up in Albany, the state raised the statewide speed limit from 25 to 30. And my then predecessor 50 years ago, Traffic Commissioner Henry Barnes, who is, yes, the inventor of the Barnes dance, objected because he didn't think that was the right speed limit for the streets of New York. And 50 years later, we're now getting to right that wrong. So we couldn't be more pleased. The new change is going to go into effect November 7th, and we really think it's going to save some lives on the streets of New York. And again, I have to thank Secretary Foxx. He's really been with us on Vision Zero. Earlier this year, actually the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration gave New York a grant of $800,000 to look at enforcement and education, and we have that work underway. And then last month, we were the lucky recipients of a $25 million Tiger Grant, which is one of the largest grants US DOT gave out this year, to do Vision Zero work all over the city, particularly focusing on improving safety for students and pedestrians and cyclists, and particularly in some of the underserved communities of the city. So I have to say, we could not be more grateful to Secretary Foxx. He's also been a champion of what is called in the Obama administration ladders of opportunity, which is using transportation, and I know this is something that the Ford Foundation holds near and dear as well, connecting people to jobs and opportunity and the ability to improve their lives. And that's something I know my own Mayor de Blasio, that's a vision he really shares as well. He has in New York City tasked us with the ambitious goal of taking currently the 7 select bus service routes that we have around the city and getting up to 20. Within his first term. And as some of you know, we've got select bus service routes serving all the boroughs. The most recent one we installed is from Harlem to Astoria, Queens to LaGuardia Airport, a big center for jobs. And these bus routes have been extraordinary successes. New York City has some of the busiest bus routes in the country, if not the world. They can have as many as 40 or 50,000 riders a day. And we've been able to achieve improved travel times of up to 20% and great boost in ridership. And in a city as dense as New York, those are very impressive numbers. So the next one on our list, and we have some of our friends and advocates in the room that we're looking at, a big, bold idea is to do something more like a full bus rapid transit route on Woodhaven Boulevard in Queens. It would be something very groundbreaking for New York and really for the country. And again, US DOT, they've been our partner in past select bus service routes. And one other Tiger grant they gave us was to do comprehensive housing and transportation planning in the Rockaways, an area desperately in need of some good planning and one that we would ultimately like to connect to this Woodhaven bus rapid transit route. So I'm hoping when Mr. Secretary gets here, we'll get to talk to him about what a remarkable project this is. Hopefully he'll come take a tour of it. We'd love to have him there, and obviously we hope we can work with him in the future on it. I just want to close with, I think, one other area in which he's shown so much vision and leadership, and I'm sure he'll talk about it today. He was able to get something out which I think is going to be a great piece of legislation. He and the President, the Grow America Act, which from the point of view of urban America is a really visionary piece of legislation, providing the policies, the programs, and the resources that we need to really improve the transportation system in this country, spur economic growth, create jobs, you name it. And I know many of us here, we really hope he's going to succeed in Washington. I know I can speak for Mayor de Blasio and say that we certainly have his back, and we're going to do everything we can to help see this legislation passed in Washington. So with that, I don't know if he's hiding behind the scenes here, but we'll welcome Secretary Anthony Foxx.
Thank you very much, Polly, for your very warm introduction. And I have to tell you that we at USDOT, we're still sad that we lost Polly, but our loss is New York City's gain. She's an incredible public servant, dedicated, smart, and very effective. And so, Polly, we miss you, and it's great to see you again. I also want to thank the foundations in the room, in particular Ford for, of course, hosting us, but all of you for being here today, because you marshal some of America's most powerful names and brands in support of folks all across the country, many of whom are invisible to folks around the country, focusing on helping folks who are at the margins have a shot at the American dream. And we want to thank you for all of the work that you do to achieve that. I also want to focus very briefly here in my remarks on a couple of points. I've started talking less about transportation as concrete and steel because I think sometimes in this country we get so focused on the mechanics that we lose sight of what it is we're actually trying to achieve. And what we're really trying to achieve with transportation, really since human beings started moving around with a wheel, is creating better access, creating a better way to get someplace. And in fact, in the 21st century, I think we have some really good examples of not only creating better ways to get places, but in fact, when you do it, you start to see the places in between revitalized and changed in very positive ways. I've spent 15 months in this role. I've traveled more than 147,000 miles and seen 97 communities across this country. And I just want to, before I get into asking you for something, I want to kind of tell you what's happening around the country and what I see. I've been to Los Angeles, and I've seen a groundbreaking light rail project in the Crenshaw community. This is a part of Los Angeles that historically has been underserved, very high concentration of low-income people, many of whom have to get up in the morning and take several buses to get to their ultimate destination. This light rail project is coming into this community, and it's already having transformative power. My colleague, Secretary Perez, was there just a few months ago with one of the workers, a woman who lives in the neighborhood, who said that she never thought in the wildest dreams that she would ever be working on a construction project, much less one in her backyard. But it's a critical reminder that transportation doesn't just provide mobility, it creates a better quality of life, and in her case, even a job. Or I can tell you about Birmingham, Alabama, where I was on a bus tour back in the spring. And I met a young woman who was a senior in high school. She had a smile as wide as this room. Her name was Jada. And Jada told me the story of how her mom wanted her to have a better choice for a school than just her neighborhood school. But she had no way to get there except by using public transit. And so she would wake up in the morning with her mom at 5 o'clock in the morning and get on a transit bus to take it into the center city and transfer there to go to a better school. And with a great smile, she said, "And I'm graduating, I'm going to college next year." You see, transportation is more than just the sum of its parts. It's how we live. And because of that, we have a responsibility in the 21st century to really take a hard look at where our country is. to look at where we think it's going to be based on all of the available data we have, and to shape a transportation system that is equal to that task. I say all the time that I want our transportation system to be as good as the American people are, and we mean it. So what does that mean? Well, first, what it means is that we really need to drill down on how we plan transportation at the local and the state levels in several respects. For instance, I can recall having sat on a metropolitan planning organization that many times we were, in essence, rubber stamping a list from the state. And in the course of rubber stamping that list, we were leaving on the table a lot of issues around mobility, access, and transportation that weren't being placed on the table because of the process. When you go out into communities and there's public input processes, how many of those public input processes are meaningful ones? And how many of them actually reach into underserved communities and give folks an actual chance to participate in a meaningful way? I think there is a lot of improvement that can be done at the local and state levels to improve the planning process. The second area that I think we need to focus on, and Polly mentioned this in her remarks, is our policy. You know, when the interstate system was built in 1956, you know, the automobile was king. And we saw no time in the future where there would be an actual decline in revenues from the gas tax. And we had a go-go mentality when it came to building up our highway systems. Well, in an America where you're starting to see population concentrating into regions, not just cities, by the way, but suburban areas around those cities, rural areas around those suburbs. If we fail to develop mechanisms for those regions to plan effectively and be able to implement transportation projects that are responsive to the growth they're experiencing, America's going to be in one big traffic jam. And that means that communities need to have more flexibility, they need to have more choice, but they also have to think together. Not just the cities by themselves, but the suburbs and the rural areas along with them. And what Grow America represents, you know, is more than just, you know, putting more money into the Highway Trust Fund and getting more things built. But it involves a fundamental rethinking of the delivery systems that we have in transportation. And I would urge you not to let Congress think that fixing the funding piece is the only conversation we need to be having. We need to have a conversation about policy and how projects are delivered in this country and how we're creating choice for people to move around, because without that conversation, I fear that the country is still going to have some significant mobility challenges. The last point is we also have to look at our practice. The President has tasked USDOT, working with our Treasury Department, for instance, to look at how we can implement more public-private partnerships in transportation. And it is causing us to fundamentally rethink how we engage with states and local communities to improve that conversation. How do we move projects through the permitting process, which we hear from private sector investors is one of the most significant deterrents to more private sector investment. And so we are working at USDOT to look at what we can do to be responsive, not just, again, to where the country is, but where we think the country is going. We also believe, in terms of practice, that looking at bicycle and pedestrian safety is an incredibly important issue for us today. Again, with population beginning to concentrate in metro areas, folks are going to be using more alternatives to transportation. You're seeing it right here in New York City, and I could pick a few other places around the country where it's bike and pedestrian activity is increasing. And it is the single area of our data set that is actually seeing an increase in fatalities and accidents. And so for us at USDOT, focusing on this and getting our arms around it and working with communities that are really at the leading edge, like New York with Vision Zero and Polly, your work, we want to make a huge dent in this area. So we need to look at how the vision is developed from the local and state perspective and continuing to improve the mechanisms by which input and output work together. We need to continue working on policy as we're working on funding and to make the push to Congress that it is not just a funding issue we face as a country. We also need to set ourselves up for making the very best policy choices going forward. And then finally, working to improve our practice, again, to be responsive and nimble in the 21st century, which is a rapidly changing period in American history. So I want to thank you very much. I'm going to stop there, and I look forward to some back and forth with you as we go forward. Thank you.
I want to invite people who have a question for the Secretary to come up to line up at the microphone. We have a few more minutes for some questions.
Good morning. First, thank you so much for your good words about what you're doing in the country and what you're doing for the city of New York. My name is Lance J. Brown. I'm the president of the American Institute of Architects in New York. We appreciate all that you spoke about. There were two questions that I had. One, we heard earlier this year from the Director of Public Space in Zurich about the growing problem they have between pedestrians and cyclists. So my first question would be, what in fact is being looked at? Where do you go to investigate and research how to deal with this leading edge conflict? And second, whether or not you can tell us about any new and creative strategies that you're looking at for funding the necessary, robust public transit system that the country needs.
Okay. So on the bike pedestrian safety issue, we're looking at an entire range of things. We're looking at, how we collect data. You'd be surprised at the variations on data that occur from state to state, and we're trying to figure out a way to get the data in an apples-to-apples place. We're also working on best practices. And we launched a pilot. Polly mentioned it in her intro. New York was one of the places that we engaged in this. But we're really trying to test what local practices are working, which ones aren't working, and to roll those into a set of best practices that we can share with the rest of the country. On an as-applied basis, you can look at the 6 rounds of Tiger grants that have come out, and you can see a very discernible focus on bike ped. And I think the conversation in this country has changed dramatically in this administration due to the great work of Polly and my predecessor, Secretary LaHood, to start the conversation, and we're trying to deepen it. And you're starting to see it happen in some unlikely places. I mean, we have some rural bike ped projects that are happening in this country. And I think that's important because, you'd be surprised. You would think that this would just be an urban issue, but I've had members of both sides of the aisle call me asking for help with bike ped projects in Kentucky, in Alabama, in Florida. So I think it's important that we start to see this branching out into all parts of the country, and it is happening. But what we're going to do at USDOT is you're going to see a series of packages that we are going to put out there and provide technical assistance to local communities to back up those packages so that we can work with communities that are looking to make headway there. On the public transportation question that you raised, our Grow America package increases the amount of money that goes into what we're calling the Transportation Trust Fund. And we increase our transit investments by 70% because we see the need for it. And we actually have a specific program that would expand bus rapid transit, but really all of our transit programs would actually see an increase. But again, I think this is as much a policy conversation as it is a funding conversation, because I think those of us who see the demographics and see the trends that are coming have a duty to really work hard to explain to the country why a shift like that is necessary. We don't stop spending in highways. We increase that by 22%. But I think it's very important that we start to really acknowledge that for citizens and folks in this country to have good mobility choices, they're going to have a mix in these fast-growing areas.
So in the interest of time,
Yeah.
since the Secretary needs to leave pretty soon, why don't we have 2 questions asked here, and then after your response, we'll go to the 3 questions over there.
Okay, good.
Thanks a lot. Heather Allen from TRL Transport Research Laboratory, an independent research institute in the UK. Thank you very much for your very encouraging speech. And I've heard a lot of what is going on in America. It's really very, very innovative. And that's the word I want to look at. If we are actually going to change the transport paradigm that we have today, which is what you alluded in your speech, and you particularly looked at the public-private partnership area, one of the issues really in public transport that is a key barrier is bringing innovation into the market. It's not just looking at projects, it's really scale them up and bring them into the mainstream. And yet the present paradigm that we work around does not allow innovation really into the procurement process. And I'd be really interested to know how you're going to address that in the next few years.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think you're seeing our administration take a very significant lean in to these issues. And I want to use one example that's actually not a DOT example, but it's actually a Department of Agriculture example. My colleague, Secretary Tom Vilsack, is looking to get more private investment in rural infrastructure. But if you look at any single project that they may try to tap for private sector investment, the scale of it's probably too small to attract major funding. So they're looking at a bundling approach where, you know, hundreds of projects in theory could be combined to create the kind of scale that would attract private sector investment and move forward. And we're seeing the same thing happen in our space. A month and a half or so ago, when Secretary Liu and I did our public-private partnership conference back at the Treasury Department, we actually announced a project in Pennsylvania where the state is basically getting 500 bridges built, and they've aggregated it into a project that we're helping to support through our innovative financing program. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of looking at structures that support public-private partnerships. What we're doing at DOT is we're trying to get on the front end of the planning process with the states and local governments so that if they have projects that they think are potentially 3P projects, that we're in the design with them so that the project has an optimal level of work ahead of going out to the private sector, and that's a big part of what we're doing.
next couple of questions together.
Try to be quick.
Secretary can field a couple of them.
Yep, good.
Yes, I am Jose Holguinberas, Director of the Center for Sustainable Euro Freight System, and also a member of your National Freight Advisory Committee.
Yes.
I have a question from your perspective as the leader of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Could you share with us your perspective about what should be the role of U.S. DOT in fostering freight transportation systems that basically contribute to both economic efficiency and productivity, that increase quality of life, that help us get more livable spaces? Could you share with us what your take is? What is the role of U.S. DOT in making this happen?
Okay, yeah.
Hi, I'm Anson Stewart from MIT. I appreciate that you mentioned more meaningful ways of public participation. And I'm curious what US DOT can do to encourage agencies to maybe try new innovative tools and approaches to that, and if there's a tension with that, between that and kind of the pressures you mentioned for expedited permitting and planning.
Sure, thanks.
Hello, I'm Juan Carlos Muñoz from the BRT Center of Excellence in Chile. I'm just coming from China for a visit and came to Boston afterwards. And regarding the public transport system, it really struck me that I was moving from sort of a first world public transport system into a third world public transport system when I moved from China to Boston. And I've heard of you mentioning that you see BRT as an important tool to improve public transport. I totally agree, especially because it disputes the space in the city with the cars. So my question is, what else are you going to do to dispute the space? What else are you going to do to make car less attractive, other than just adding a BRT line that otherwise would be very resisted?
Okay. So on freight, we have a huge opportunity in this country right now. We're seeing more manufacturing activity in the U.S. now than we have for 15 years. And that's due to a lot of work that's gone on across the private sector as well as the administration to facilitate that. But if we're going to grow to our potential, and estimates are that we're going to need to basically double our freight capacity over the next 35 years, we're going to need more transportation facilities to do it. And it means rail facilities, it means port facilities, it means highway improvements, it means a lot of things. And quite frankly, folks don't think transit is related to this, but frankly, if you're in a highly congested region and you have significant transit assets, getting other users off the road so that you can free up space on existing roadways is actually a helpful thing for freight too. So I think we've got an opportunity here, but this is a place where having the federal government in a position to support these assets, in a position to help communities plan them effectively, is critical. And that means we need a transportation bill. It needs to be long-term, and it needs to be sustainable. On the question, I'm trying to remember now, that it had to do with public participation. Look, I think this is a place where there's a lot we can do on the best practice front at USDOT. We may have some tools to encourage states and local governments to maybe do things differently. My experience was that sometimes the planning process was design, plan, and then talk to the public. And I think we need to have a process where the public's actually at the table in a real and effective way. And so I think there's a place for technology here. I think there's a lot of flexibility at the state and local levels to actualize a better process. And I think we need to have some states working with us and with philanthropic interest to maybe experiment with some ways of using technology more effectively to get input. And then BRT, look, BRT is like instant transit. It's quick if you can get the resources in place to start it up. And we do think there's an opportunity to grow BRT in this country. But I really get back to the fundamental place that, we're going to be very limited in our ability to do that under current funding constraints and policy constraints. And, if we're going to have a real shot at deepening mobility through BRT, we're going to need to have more funding, but we're also going to need to have the kind of policies you see in Grow America that facilitate it. Yeah.
Thank you again for your speech. My name is Jeffrey Daston. I'm with Reuters News.
Sure.
Returning to safety, if you could give us any insight into who will be the next NHTSA administrator, perhaps Peter Rogoff or Kevin Vincent, and regarding its internal review, who's leading the internal review, and if NHTSA's culture needs to change, how?
So, the announcement of someone to fill a vacancy that the president appoints is the president's news to make. So I'm not going to make that news today. But let me say this. Safety is our highest, most important priority at USDOT, bar none. And I believe, and my team believes, that we should always be in a position where we're asking ourselves harder questions than the rest of the world does. And that is why we have routinely, following issues or concerns about practice or performance, we've done after-action reviews of our work. When the Toyota issue emerged a few years ago, Secretary LaHood asked the Inspector General to come in and take a look. That's what I've done. I've also asked our team to do a due diligence review, and I make no apologies for taking a look at our safety posture as an agency. It's like a checkup, and I think that's a good practice for us to do, and we need to be self-examined enough to be willing to do that. So there'll be more on that as we go along, but I think it's a good practice to take a look at yourself sometimes.
Mr. Secretary, Stephen Miller from Streets Blog. During your remarks, you said that USDOT will be developing packages and technical assistance as part of its bike ped initiatives.
Yep.
Could you describe those packages, what that contains a little bit more?
Yeah.
And you also called Vision Zero leading edge.
Yeah.
Are you looking to Vision Zero as a potential national policy or a guide on national policy for bike ped safety?
Yeah, well, we have Vision Zero for everything. Our goal is to eliminate fatalities, period. And we do it across a range of fronts. Now, we have to have the help of the private sector in many cases and the public sector because in many cases the infrastructure that folks use are being built by states and local governments, and when it's built well, it actually can be part of the solution. I think what you're going to see out of us is, as I say, suggestions on how to improve the built environment, for instance. Having dedicated lanes where that's feasible. We're going to have some behavioral recommendations. But I think by and large, our efforts around bicycle and pedestrian safety are very consistent with our efforts across the range of modes of transportation and safety. This just happens to be an area where local and state governments have shared responsibility with us to try to tackle this problem.
Now and let the secretary get on with his day. So
Okay.
can you please join me in a
Thank you, everybody.
round of applause? Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary. At this point, I'd like to get the first panel members up on stage, and please join me in welcoming Peter Donohue from the New York Daily News, who will be our moderator.
Stage right is on the left. Is on the left, right?
Thank you.
See you. So right here.
Thanks, man.
Missing somebody?
Okay, I'm Pete Donohue. I'm a veteran transit reporter for the New York Daily News. We don't have much time here, so if anyone recalls the McLaughlin report, I think we'll go pretty fast here and go from subject to subject, and maybe if we'll have time, we'll have some questions for the audience. Can you hear me with this? First of all, I want to talk about the transportation bill, the Grow America Act that was mentioned. The Secretary said it needs to be long-term and sustainable. I'd like to put to the panel, do you think that fits, does the bill fit that description, and why not? Or why?
Well, maybe I'll jump in. It seems to me that the big issue, here in New York and across the country is that we need the financial resources. Of course, we need reforms and how the money is spent and so forth. But we're just underinvesting in these systems. I described the current policy, national policy, as the road to ruin. I mean, that's basically where we're heading. It's not just the Green Line in Boston's third world. It's it's our entire transportation infrastructure is literally falling apart. And the president has, there's culpability all around in Washington. Paul Krugman, in his column yesterday in the Times, I think put the focus where it needs to be. And it's nice to say that there's gridlock in Washington. The problem is the Republican Party has walked away from any interest. They're opposed to any investments, any public investments in infrastructure and in transportation, which is a dramatic departure. I had lunch with Emil Frankel yesterday, who was Assistant Secretary in the Bush administration, and he's incredulous at where the Republican Party is in this thing. So that, we need to focus on that. But there's culpability at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue as well. The president has never suggested a sustainable, that's the word, sustainable financing scheme. Whether you like the Highway Trust Fund or the gas tax or not, or the National Defense Interstate Highway System, which created which didn't create but supplemented, greatly expanded, federal funding for this thing. There was a sustainable program that lasted for 50 years. It's no longer sustainable. We need that again. And it's not about a one-time fix, with the corporate tax code or repatriating overseas earnings or that sort of thing. We need, and it probably needs to be a user fee, and it probably needs to be a gas tax or a VMT fee or, a combination of those things. But there's got to be a ramping up and a continuing and sustained commitment to investing in the infrastructure of this country.
Well, I'm glad you went to...
It's really ironic because I'd say in the Obama administration, we've probably had the two best and most thoughtful transportation secretaries in the country's history. And they're in this horrible situation in Washington where it's very, very hard to move. And, you could fault the White House over not having a gas tax increase, but it's very hard to see that happening with Congress. So, I think, they haven't talked about it, but I think it's because they feel like they can't get it. The places that are investing are places.
What about leadership? That's
I don't disagree, Bob, and I think leadership is 50% of any kind of change, and that's been true here in New York with street policy and other things. The MTA capital plan back in the 80s, absolutely. We do need leadership, but the places that are getting things done are doing it for themselves. They're raising state taxes and doing the investment. It's not a substitute, but it's the way forward right now. And they're even places like Los Angeles are raising municipal revenue.
Yeah, and we're not getting that leadership, I don't think, at the state level now. I think we can still hope for it as the MTA capital plan moves forward. But when we're hearing that there isn't really a gap and that the $32 billion plan is bloated, I think most of us would say the $32 billion plan doesn't do enough, that we've got a $1 trillion asset that we need to bring to a state of good repair and keep it that way. At the same time, we need to expand to meet, expanding demand. So it's not happening.
Now, in terms of funding, either on the state or federal level, the gas tax hasn't been changed for decades. Is it time to give that up and just say, politically, that's never going to happen and move on? Or is that something that advocates maybe looking to Europe should push full force?
Well, the rest of the world, is continuing to depend on a gas tax, and obviously it's declining revenues, more efficient vehicles, reduced VMTs in this region, and in other urban centers around the country. Now it doesn't mean that you can't have a gas tax, but the rate has to go up. I mean, I looked at it I was on a commission that the Miller Center had at UVA a few weeks ago in Washington, and read the Clay Commission report. And it's kind of interesting what General Clay did. 3 years in a row going into the Eisenhower administration, the National Governors Association recommended eliminating the federal gas tax and returning those dollars to the states. And Lucius Clay is a very clever guy. He came forward. They originally wanted a 4-cent gas tax, which was a 2-cent increase to pay for the interstate highway system. They couldn't get it, so they went with a 1-cent increase. That doesn't sound like a lot of money, but at the time the gasoline was 18 cents a gallon, so it was 20% basically of the cost of, or 25, or close to 25% of the cost of a gallon of gasoline when they went to 4 cents in '59. That would be 80 cents a gallon today. We're at 18.4 cents a gallon. I mean, that's the problem, is that when you Google, sometimes just have a good time and Google national gas taxes just for fun, and you'll see that the highest gas taxes in the country are places like Sweden and Denmark and the United Kingdom and so forth, which is generally $2-3 a gallon. And then look for the bottom 5. It's the U.S., the United Arab Emirates, Venezuela, Iran. I mean, is that the company we want to be in? I mean, I understand we're now a petroleum exporting country again.
There's no inherent problem with the gas tax. It's the politics now is any tax is toxic, so we might as well stick with the gas tax. The problem with the gas tax is that we haven't raised it. But look, Virginia raised its gas tax. I mean, Chris Christie is talking about raising the gas tax, which tells you how bad the situation has gotten in New Jersey.
Or how bad his presidential prospects are looking at one of the other.
So, yeah. So, you could replace it with a VMT fee. I think we have a good mechanism, and we should just, and some states are even indexing their gas taxes to try to take the politics out of it in the future, which, never works over the long run, but it's what we need to do.
Okay, but on the state and the federal level, whether it's the gas tax or the Grow America Act, I mean, how do you break through, the Republican wall that you described it? If you agree with that, how do you get through that logjam? I mean, you can appeal to the people. You can, those things are very tough to pull off.
Well, it's I've suggested that we increase the gas tax to what the public thinks the gas tax is. I think most people have no idea what the federal gas tax is. They think it's 50% of the cost of a gallon of gasoline. Well, let's not go to 50%. Let's go to 20%. Let's go something along those lines. And we're at, what are we at? About 3% or 4%, something like that. And but again, it comes back to leadership. And again, several times in American history, and again, invoking Dwight Eisenhower, I mean, the man stepped onto the south portico of the White House and proclaimed that this was something that we needed to do. And he built support for it. The Clay Commission really did their job well. They pulled in a group of business and labor leaders, highly respected individuals, and they made the case. Interesting, the arguments that they made. One was national defense. Okay, it was the National Defense Highway Act. 2 was economic growth. 3 was congestion reduction. 4 was safety. Now, those are the issues that we ought to be pushing today. The only way to compete globally is to make these investments. The only way to sustain national defense and the defense established in this country is to have the GDP to underpin it. You need to make these transportation investments. The safety issue, we still have 40,000 people dying every year on the highways of this country. And it's nice to talk about just pedestrians, and we're killing lots of people on bicycles and pedestrians, but people in automobiles and so forth. And then finally, congestion is driving Americans crazy. Most Americans spend tens of hours, hundreds of hours a year sitting in traffic. And so if you went back to the American people and said, we're going to fix these things, we're going to address these problems, but you got to start with a vision. You got to start with leadership.
And if you look at the history of ballot measures that are put before Americans on these issues, our bridges are crumbling. We need a bond act. Those things pass, 2 or 3 to 1 in terms of, the success versus failure rate at American ballot boxes. Not in this region, but in the whole country. And people track those things. And when you make the case and it's a very specific need where the money's going to go, people vote for it. Americans vote for it. So I do think with the leadership Bob's describing, very similar case in 1982, state and city leaders said, we're not going to bring the city back unless we rebuild the subway. You know, we're like $100 billion or so into that investment now.
Yep.
And, you know, it worked. You wouldn't have the city of today with the subways of 1985.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that leadership at the state level helps inform and provoke the national conversation. I think we have to step up. You know, we need a revenue source, and it's probably something like bridge tolls. It's probably something like the Sam Schwartz plan if we want to break out of the downward spiral that we're going to end up in.
How do you get the message across? I mean, as a transportation reporter, it's every year, every 5 years, the MTA capital plan, it's doom and gloom, doesn't have any funding, there's a huge gap. At the end of the day, it winds up getting funded. One way or the other, I mean, the MTA borrows and has borrowed. How do you get across, why is it different this time? Is this a greater urgency, a greater emergency?
Don't you think that system is breaking down a little bit? Even the sort of kabuki dance. Like, we've been seeing capital programs that are 3 years funded with 2 years of TBD funding now. Right. I mean, it's getting pretty crumbly.
Well, I think, you know, look, I guess I'm on my 5th MTA capital program, and every time we start this, everyone says it'll never happen, we can't do it, you know, it's too steep a curve and so forth, and we always do it. You know, I agree that, you know, if we're not at the end of the curve, we're getting real close to the end of it. You know, that we're close to the MTAs. I think it's 18% of their budgets now, debt service. You know, we can't go too much higher than that without putting enormous pressure on everything that the MTA does, their daily operations and so forth. So we need to find some new revenue streams. You know, I think the SAM plan, you know, for East River Bridge tolls is one way to do it. You could close the entire, you know, gap in the upcoming MTA capital program if we did that. You could go back to the stuff that Ravage did, and there are a whole series. There are you know, several taxes and fees that nobody knows that they're paying them. And Dick always said, you know, you get them in place and then you raise them a little bit and so forth to sustain the system. And I think the users, you know, of the system have to pay as well. That there has to be, and we always end up spreading the blame, or sharing the hit to different sectors of the society.
Sure.
The real estate, you know, of industry, commercial real estate people need to pay a piece of it. I think City of New York needs to belly up. The City of New York, you know, Giuliani cut the city's contribution to the MTA capital program, and the city, you know, has an inordinate share of the benefits of this thing, and the city needs to belly up. But we need to do that again. But
yeah. But I think one of the ways that you get broad-based support for that and begin to change the dynamic is for the benefits of the capital plan to be more broadly shared and more quickly delivered than they've sometimes been in the past. I think the money that went into some of the mega rail projects, if we looked in, you know, I think, you know, early in this century, we thought the good times were going to go on forever, and there was a long list of rail projects that thankfully didn't get started because they would have sucked up whatever capital was left. I think bus rapid transit being described as instant transit is pretty close. It's cost effective, but it's not free. If you put a little money into it, you get a lot back. And the administration's commitment to deploy it really widely through the boroughs and to fill in the gaps in the transit system and connect people up in the outer borough neighborhoods that were maybe imagined in the 1960s to be places where people would always drive, and that's no longer the case. I think rolling out things like bus rapid transit and making it a good option for folks is going to begin to change the dynamic of public support for something like the SAM plan.
It's a great point. Even things just like painting a station and not waiting for it to come around the 30-year cycle of station rehabilitation just gives people a stake in this thing that you don't see. And we had tremendous, success with that at City DOT by doing things fast and showing people that it wasn't like a decade away and a lot of time.
Right. I mean, early on, the idea of bus rapid transit or SBS, there was a lot of cynicism about it, about people boarding without paying, at the front of the bus. So yeah, I mean that has been a big public change. And well, I wanted to ask you,
I want to just respond a little bit to. But I think, look, there's a place for SBS. There's a place for BRT. We're very excited about the Woodhaven Boulevard project that Polly discussed. And one of the reasons is that there are very few places in the city where we have 10 and 12 lane Baroque boulevards. Most of them, by the Grand Concourse and the Queens Boulevard, have subways underneath them. And Woodhaven Boulevard, and we have this very fine-grained street system that is very different than what you see in other BRT cities in Latin America principally or in Europe. So we need to understand both the potential of BRT and SBS, and we need to understand the limitations. If we're going to accommodate another million New Yorkers, and again, BRT is SBS essential to filling in the gaps in the transit system and going into these transit deserts quickly and effectively. But we need to continue to look at transit projects. We're very excited about the potential to convert underutilized rail rights of way, which is what the rest of the world is doing. Surface grade separated transit lines, that can be shared with freight services in many cases. These are cost effective. London has put $2 billion into the overground system and has created a new circumferential network that is for $2 billion, 500,000 passengers a day. In less than 6 years, they're going for 1 million passengers a day. That's the Lexington Avenue subway for a couple $2 billion. And so I think we need to be looking at all of the modes. MTA has been very shy about putting its toe in the water with things like light rail, for example, or ferries or surface transit. And I think we need to be looking at all of those modes in addition to SBS.
There seems to be a growing recognition about real estate and how it benefits from the transit. I mean, historically, everybody knows that, but you're seeing expansion projects come on the Bloomberg administration, the funding from the real estate taxes on the west side. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about how New York City or the MTA, for example, can tap into the Second Avenue subway, the Long Island project into Grand Central, and how receptive is the real estate industry to acknowledging and really committing, other than lobbying, to contributing to these needs?
Well, they're not going to lead the parade on it, I don't think. They'll probably drag their feet. But London, for example, Crossrail is being funded 1/3 by a citywide surcharge on commercial property taxes, which, by the way, London First and the Greater London Chamber helped lead the political advocacy for that thing, the business community. And then secondly, through, they call them CILs, community infrastructure levies, which are basically TIF districts, value capture districts around the stations. In many cases, in Canary Wharf, for example, the private sector is actually building the station in return for the ability to put a shopping mall. It's basically the airport model of finance.
Maybe this is the way that the city comes back to the table on transit funding.
Could be, yeah.
Because they need to set up these zoning instruments. It can't come out of nowhere like the state government or the MTA. And maybe there's even a framework around affordability that there's a transportation component to that for access. We're here talking about access. That's the way you do it. Is you bring the city. We have a great city planning commissioner who knows this stuff cold, knows the city really well, and could start thinking about this thing. It needs to be a lot more systematic. We do this on a kind of a one-off basis now in New York.
Yeah, I got to say, I think the devil's in the details around value capture. I think it's going to be every penny that can be wrung out of the value that's created by Midtown East rezoning to even, to catch up access in and out of Grand Central to a point where it won't be paralyzed by the new development that takes place. So I don't think it's by any means a panacea, and I think sometimes development creates costs that fall on the transit system, and then we act as if we're heroes when we get a few pennies back from those developers to mitigate some of the harm.
Yeah, so you're saying your concern is that the potential you'd just be treading water. You'll be getting more riders, and you have the same amount of crowding and conditions.
It's a reactive policy.
You'd be treading water
It's not getting us ahead.
Hey, I have a dramatic policy proposal. We could build a Second Avenue subway. Imagine that.
The man's a genius.
Yeah,
You're ahead of your time.
Yeah, and they could help pay for it. Imagine that, right?
Yeah. But I think the concern is that not only are we treading water on some of the most capital-intensive projects, but that ties up a huge amount of agency bandwidth at MTA, at city government. The time that it takes to fine-tune these deals and make them happen is brain power and bandwidth that's being taken away from solving a lot of other problems in other parts of the city that don't get the love.
Which is why you want to do it the way John suggested. So not a series of one-offs, where it's brain surgery. In fact, that we, you create stations or you create TIF districts around 2nd Avenue subway stations and capture the value, and it becomes, an automatic thing as opposed to something that you have to invent the wheel each time.
Right.
That is, by the way, how the rest of the world is helping. Most places are doing this, and the systems in China and Hong Kong and Singapore and so forth are being funded largely. MTR and MRT in Hong Kong and Singapore are basically real estate companies with transit subsidiaries, and we're not going to do that. But they create enormous value, and then they capture it to help finance these investments.
So if you had to pick, each of you, if you had to pick one funding mechanism for MTA projects, let's stick with the MTA because it's the monster here. If you had to pick one to put all your political capital in, because you have to focus in this coming next 6 months, would it be the Sam Schwartz? Would it be tolling bridges? Would it be focusing on development? Would it be a gas tax? And maybe fourth, would it be increasing some of the taxes that already go to transit? If you have to pick one, and do you agree that there has to be a concentrated?
You haven't been spending a lot of time in Albany because nobody does just pick one.
Right, but
spread
I mean, you're going to have
pain.
a pretty focused plan, not only to convince the politicians, but Joe Ryder, right? You're not going to be able to throw a whole.
I think you can split it a little bit. It needs to be not Sam's plan, but Andrew's plan. So that needs to come from the state, and that is the next thing that should happen. It's the sustainable revenue that we could put in right away. It's easy to set up. There's a plan on the shelf that could be pulled off and updated and implemented. It's all written and ready to go. And then we need the city to create that kind of framework for value capture and smart transportation linked to zoning.
And I think given the fact that we've had almost 80-cent drop in gas taxes, it would not be a terrible thing for the petroleum business tax, which funds the wholesale tax on diesel and gasoline, to be increased significantly. Nobody even noticed it.
This is the time. I mean, oil's just plunged in price recently.
Yeah.
So I think some combination of those. But the SAM plan, I agree, it needs to become the Andrew plan, but it can be. It makes a lot of sense. It's been very well thought through. I think there's a level of public support and business support that wasn't there the last time we did it because it's a different plan. It's a much more equitable approach. And I think there's real potential and that closes the entire gap.
Yeah, I think both political leaders, I think, the media has done its part but can do more to unpack for the general public how different the Sam Schwartz plan is from any of its predecessors. It lowers tolls on bridges where people have little choice but to drive. It distributes the benefits in a much more equitable way. And I think when most people hear the shorthand bridge tolls, they think back to Bloomberg's congestion pricing proposal that didn't fly because it didn't have those equity factors taken into account. So I think more needs, it's hard to unpack.
That's not why it didn't fly.
Well, there probably were some other reasons, but I think unpacking a complicated thing like how you finance transportation by taking from the places that can afford it and giving to the places that need it is a thing that needs to be more intelligible to the general public.
And you both, some of you mentioned that you think the riders have to pay. At what point is there a tipping point? I mean, the MTA has been raising fares. I did it 3 years in a row, and then they have this stated policy of every other year. I mean, does it get to a point where it's just too much for New Yorkers to afford? And is that a viable argument in the upcoming discussion?
Well, we've had a set of political principles. Let me put it that way: principles for 100 years about not having distance-based fares, for example. It's always been the great commitment of this city to the guys who've come in from men and women who come in from the farthest distances pay the same fare as the folks who do 1 or 2 stops in Midtown. I think that's a matter of high principle in this town, and that's going to be hard to overturn. We're probably not going to do that. Could we have some kind of premium fare, during rush hours on the most crowded, congested? We do it on the commuter rail system already. DC's just expanded their peak pricing in the core of the region during the peak period. We're still subsidizing investment bankers on the Lex to the tune of, probably close to $1 a ride. And
I mean, I think the tipping point is more complex than just a simple price point. I mean, you have higher fares in much of the world, but you also have a better experience in many of those
And you have lower
situations
housing costs
and
in
better,
much of the world.
well, not all of the world,
Yeah.
but so I think the tipping point doesn't get reached as long as you're delivering some quality and people see that.
I think we need to get out of this business that where we wave the bloody flag every time somebody proposes a fare increase. It's been going on for 100 years. It's really undercut the ability to invest in this system. I think I agree with you that if we had a higher quality service, more reliable, more frequent service, less crowded service, people would be willing to pay a modest amount. Again, with the notion that everybody's going to belly up, that the private sector is going to, the real estate industry is going to be a part of it. The people who benefit from it in other ways are going to pay for it. The drivers are going to pay a little bit more and so forth. I think that's the kind of equation that can fly.
Yeah, I think you can't take a concept like fare box ratio and compare New York to other cities, because the affordability of transit in this city underpins the ability of working class families to hang on and stay in the face of housing costs. And our transit system is what enables our real estate industry to be viable. So I think that's, and you can't take out of one pocket and put it into the other pocket and consider that you've made any progress. So I think for the folks at the bottom of the economic heap, every fare increase is a matter of life and death. Every fare increase pushes them further and further to the level of combined housing and transit costs that they really can't hang on. So I'm not saying there can never be a fare increase, but this is not kind of a pot of gold that can just be rated.
Most of the rest of the world has, again, as we move to a new fare collection system, which is something the MTA needs to do. Most of the rest of the world has social fares, where they basically have discounted fares for low-income households, for unemployed and so forth. If you're unemployed in London, you get a free pass on the underground. And another thing that other cities have done is they've differential fares between buses and transit, simply because the income levels are lower, for bus riders, for example. So why don't we give them a discount? And
we want the MTA in the social service business? I don't think so. And that's how you end up with more and more of a two-tiered system.
I didn't say that the MTA needed to pay for it. I'm just saying that, although, again, if the total revenues are in fact greater, then it may be something that we should look at as opposed to dismissing out of hand.
Yeah, I don't think we want to stigmatize any set of riders. I think the idea that if you're unemployed, you can ride around on the subway all day for free, I think would not fly here.
Only you'd get a mail-in ride pass the way other people get them, so there's no stigma involved. You'd have the same fare card that everybody else has.
Well, I think if you check back here in 24 hours, Bob and Joan will still be having this conversation. But I'm getting signals that it's time to wrap up. So I hope you found this informative, and enjoy your stay in New York.
Okay, we're going to take a break now.